Welcome, everybody, to Web and Beyond Live. This is April 14th, 2021. I'm Ray Sidney Smith, president of W3 Consulting and managing director of W3C Web Services. And Web and Beyond Live is my weekly time to come to you and talk to you about what's going on in the small business digital marketing and productivity technology world. And so this week, I had to come to you a little bit later than I normally would because of some client issues that came up and just had to deal with those. And so today, though, we're going to be talking about the FCC, the Chinese new cryptocurrency, a little bit of hacking news. We'll talk about Facebook and Pinterest and Yahoo of all things. And then what I wanted to do was spend most of the time on a particular report that came out from Later, and I'm presuming they pronounce their name For, but these two companies, Later is a scheduling application for various social networks. For is some kind of agency, and they put together the State of Influencer Marketing in 2021 report. They called it the Selling Power of Influencers. And I wanted to talk through how they define nano, micro, mid, macro, and mega macro influencers and some of the data they unearth from analyzing Instagram. So with that, let's get into our news this week, and then we'll hop into our discussion on the state of influencers. And so first up is that the FCC has put out this notice, which is asking Americans to, in essence, test their speed. They're trying to figure out the state of US broadband currently. And so they are going out there and requesting Americans to just pop up this speed test application. And if we click on this, that you're taken to an Apple application. I believe there doesn't seem to be an Android one. I thought there was an Android one also. I'll check, and if there is, I'll put a link to that in the video description. But either way, there is this FCC speed test application, and they're really trying to measure broadband speed across a wide variety of a large swath of the internet. And this is going to help them, of course, figure out whether or not there needs to be some kind of regulatory perspective regarding coverage and access to the public at large. I think this is fantastic. It's necessary. As you know, and I've spoken about before, I believe that broadband internet access is and should be a fundamental right to American citizens, so really to global citizens, and we need to be able to advocate for that. And without it, we're really stuck in this place where we can't innovate, we can't grow our businesses if we don't have access to this. So good on the FCC to start this process. Next up is a Seeking Alpha article that said, bye-bye Bitcoin. The PRC, which is the People's Republic of China, has launched their own digital cryptocurrency. And they talked about in the article how it's really going to change many things because of the leverage that the Chinese yuan has on the global market. So in essence, what this is a mobile application perspective where the smartphone is used as a currency by allowing buyer and seller to basically transact anonymously with each other, but the government can intervene in essence and recognize what's going on in the back end, and that way they can kind of look at transactions and analyze. And of course, we in the Western world would probably think of this as a little bit kind of batty. But just understand from the Chinese perspective, this is a normal part of how the Chinese government interacts with their citizenry. And so the reality is that they have and have always had the capability really of analyzing and tracking all of the data about their citizens. And they are now implementing this technology. I wanted to bring this up because a digital yuan is really going to be, this is very powerful. This is going to push forward the idea of bringing more cryptocurrency to reality in the rest of the world. If the Chinese are going to push, digital currency, that means more e-commerce. That means more of other companies playing catch up now with bringing forward the use of cryptocurrency. Will other countries, in essence, create fiat, meaning country-owned cryptocurrency, and that's of course going to push forward the technology. In one sense, it's obviously going to challenge the concept of Bitcoin and others that choose to try and reject the idea of using government funded or government backed currencies. So this is pushing the argument, pushing the challenge of cryptocurrency to the fore. And you as a small business should be starting to think about whether or not your particular financial institutions are accepting cryptocurrencies, whether or not you plan to accept cryptocurrencies, and what that really means as an impact on your business. Remember, there is basically an exchange rate that's happening with cryptocurrency. So each cryptocurrency and cryptocurrency back to your normal currency exchange, US dollars, Canadian dollars, or otherwise, it now has to be done. And that means there could be a potential advantage or disadvantage to doing that exchange at any given time. So something to start thinking about and considering as you make your way forward, whether or not your, like for example, PayPal can now accept cryptocurrency. You can set up a PayPal store and accept cryptocurrencies on your website. Or for services, you can send invoices and they can be paid via cryptocurrency. These are things that we're now going to have to start making considerations for in our businesses. And just know that, now that China has done it, this is really a huge player in the market globally, and so this is really going to force the hand of a lot of people around the world. Next up is, unfortunately, we talked about this in the last episode that Facebook had a hack back in, I think, 2016 or so, and they dumped all of this data about Facebook users, and fairly benign data, but enough that other people could potentially hack, based on phishing attacks, other social engineering attacks, to be able to get this data out there. And now, of course, it's known that LinkedIn has had a dump of their database, not their entire database, but it's 500 million LinkedIn users' data has basically been put up on a hacker's website for sale. This is, of course, it says, this was a data scrape. I'm sorry, I said 2016. It was 2019 that this data scrape was leaked out for Facebook. This, of course, is data from LinkedIn, and these 500 million records are now out there on sale. Again, same kind of data, which are usernames, IDs, email addresses, phone numbers, and professional titles, and so on and so forth. Nothing that is your username and password necessarily, but still detrimental to people if there are social engineering attacks that are going out there. So just be mindful, pay attention that if you start getting phone calls or emails or those kinds of things that seem to know a lot about you, be skeptical and definitely check with the individual parties and do due diligence before you start responding to things and giving more information up from people, because our information is just out there. And certainly as we're networking online and in a digital space, our information is in Facebook and LinkedIn and Pinterest and Instagram and otherwise. And those databases, of course, are susceptible to hacking. Next up is a little bit of news around Facebook. Of course, Facebook is out there testing many different things. I mean, I recently read they had like a speed dating app they launched to test. Now, of course, there has been news about them testing something called Hotline. I signed up for beta access to it, and we'll see if they give me beta access to it, but it's called Hotline. It's a Q&A platform that looks a lot like Clubhouse in the way in which it's designed, and a little bit like Instagram Live in the way in which it's been implemented. And so you have these events that you can host, and the platform allows for you to be able to go ahead and publish these events and go ahead and do kind of question and answer with your audience. It looks really interesting. I'm curious to see how it plays out, but just know that it does now exist. If you go to hotline.co, hotline.co, you'll be able to find the page and sign up for the beta, the waiting list for it. I did, and we'll see if it comes about. But again, Facebook and LinkedIn and all of the other platforms are really looking to see how to challenge Clubhouse and bringing social audio to the fore of their social platforms. It really, they're just trying to do what everybody else is doing and making sure that they have the features for every type of media, social media that is out there on their social networks. So they're just testing and playing in the waters. And so if this kind of thing would work in your business, you want to, of course, be there. So it looks interesting. I like the idea that people can use emojis to just quickly show feedback as you're, streaming. That's very helpful. And it seems like a nice platform for you to be able to do that. I've watched several of these that have been aired. So I like the interaction. I like the engagement. Again, it depends on whether or not this becomes real in Facebook, and whether or not that becomes something that is useful across the board really is determined by whether or not they make it something real and long lasting on the platform. And while Clubhouse is quite interesting, I just don't feel like it's going to provide longevity for small business marketers who want to be able to have content that is long lasting as well, so that you don't have to constantly be in one-to-one real-time engagement with users, especially when users may not be available for you to be able to interact with them. So I'm not particularly bullish on Clubhouse in that sense, although I've been attending more and more Clubhouse events just to test the waters, see what it's all about and that kind of thing. And I would highly recommend that if you are inclined to listen in on various Clubhouse events and see what it's all about, feel free to, but just understand that it's not necessarily going to be the end-all be-all of any social network. The major social networks will ultimately command most of the attention, and Clubhouse is not going to somehow, take over, even Snapchat's place in the market, or Pinterest or Instagram, purely because it's ephemeral content, and ephemeral content is not really, just from a time perspective, it's not good for users. It's not good for the businesses who are trying to, and the organizations trying to get in front of those users. If the content is here and then gone, it's a really great place to potentially build up leads and direct people to someplace from those events. So there's clearly an opportunity there, but it's not going to be the social network for everybody. It's going to be a small group of people who enjoy and play around in that space. I'm really just still starting to figure out who that space is going to be for. It may be just for entrepreneurs talking about entrepreneurial things. It could be about different communities that end up huddling, grouping together in those spaces. And we just haven't really determined that about Clubhouse yet. But either way, Hotline's out there in its alpha testing. And so check it out if you're interested. Pinterest did something that I'm really excited about. Pinterest put out what they're calling the Creator Code, and the Creator Code is in essence basically a code of conduct for creators. And they've gone ahead and put together this code of conduct for creators to be able to really have a set of rules by which they can operate by, really promoting positivity. And the Creator Code, in essence, are these 5 principles: express yourself but be kind, start a conversation and check your facts, inspire action but avoid causing harm, be bold but acknowledge triggers, encourage others rather than divide. And so that you can read the whole code at the website. I think it's pinterestcreatorcode.com, and it'll direct you to this page. But if you go to pinterestcreatorcode.com, I believe it is. I'm going to just check that just to make sure I've got it correct here for you. And so if you go to pinterestcreatorcode.com, it directs you over to the Creator Code page on the Pinterest business website, and you can read about it and see the full text of the code. It's down here below, and it just covers a really interesting set of examples for what you should be doing and how you should be creating that content. And what I really liked about it was the fact that again, as I've talked about many times, you really do want to lean into the positive on social media. It's really not worth your time and effort to lean into the negative in terms of responding to the negative in any way, shape, or form, or even dealing with that component of it. Not that it doesn't exist, it just is what it is. There are times when you do need to deal with negative commentary and feedback and so on and so forth. But for the most part, in the generation of content, you should be really thinking about sticking to the positive content and how you can produce that content. And what they're doing here is they're giving you some guidelines that you can use across any social network, so that all of your social media, that is all of your social content, can be done with this positive perspective in mind. And I like that notion, and I think that it's going to serve creators well. That is, you as a small business marketer, it's going to serve you well in being able to create content that's going to be good for the business. So check out the Creator Code, follow it, and I bet you'll start to see benefits by virtue of doing that. More engagement, other things like that. A little bit of sad news, just like with the LinkedIn hack, we've got a little bit of unfortunate news about Yahoo Answers. It is ultimately shutting down. And so Yahoo Answers was a place where people could ask questions and get real answers from humans. Unfortunately, the reality is that over time, less people have used it. It has no real major income potential for Yahoo or whatever it is, Oath that owns them now. And really, Quora has become that place where people do Q&A, and Google, because Google, of course, has the question and answer schema from schema.org, which you can implement on your own website, by the way. So if you go to schema.org, schema.org, you can go ahead and learn how to set up question and answer that when someone asks, say, the Google Assistant for ask the Google Assistant a question, they can go ahead and get an answer directly from their Google Assistant, whether that be a Google Home or other devices, their phones and otherwise. And so because Quora and now Google has really satisfied that question and answer world, Yahoo Answers has really lost a lot of mind share as well as market share. And so therefore they're shutting down. So bye-bye Yahoo Answers is basically the point. Last up is what I wanted to spend the majority of our time today discussing. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the Selling Power of Influencers report, the influencer marketing report that Later put out in combination with Four. And so what they did was they looked at Instagram, 3.5 million Instagram posts to be exact, and they analyzed it to see correlation between Instagram follower count of influencers alongside the average amount of engagement, the average amount of reach, the average amount of save, and the average amount of video view rates for those particular accounts. And first and foremost, they designed kind of a definition around the different types of influencers. And I thought this was really interesting. So in essence, they divvied up influencers into 5 different categories: nano influencers, micro influencers, mid, macro, and then mega macro influencers. And so nano, in essence, means that you have between 0 and 10,000. I would presume that means 1 and 10,000 followers, because you can't be an influencer if there are 0 followers. But in essence, between 1 and 10,000 followers. Then micro is 10,000 to 100,000 followers. Mid influencers are 100,000 to, or 101,000 to 500,000, macro 501 to 1 million, and then macro is basically over 1 million followers. And so they provided these set of categories, and I think that's helpful for you to start thinking about in terms of where your own business is. Most of us, I think, are going to land in that nano influencer space. And that also means that when we're out there thinking about marketing, we ourselves as small businesses end up being influencers. And we may be collaborating with other colleagues and other folks that themselves are influencers, maybe nano, maybe micro, maybe mid, macro, and mega macro influencers. And we also may decide to put marketing dollars that is advertised through either sponsored posts or other kinds of partnerships with other influencers. And what this report does is it gives us some key findings regarding how we want to look at those particular influencers and how they might be useful to us. So the first thing they asked was, how do follower counts impact feed post engagement rates? And so they give us some information regarding that. And the first kind of problem I have with this report, and while the report is useful and interesting, and I do highly recommend that you check it out, they give you an engagement rate. And what they did is they said engagement rate equals your likes plus your comments divided by the total number of followers. And while this is the standard industry formula for doing so, I tend to think of influence and engagement rate as being your influence rate. And an influence rate becomes really what your conversion is. That is what you want people to do when they come over to your website, divided by the number of people who saw that particular post. And so this is a little bit of a different way to measure this. So again, if I want someone to sign up for my newsletter and I go out there and I have X number of people who actually saw my call to action that said, hey, come sign up for my newsletter, I want to see that rate of return on my work. And that becomes a higher bar to higher threshold to reach, but it actually ends up being a more reflective of your influence, because likes and comments are not that they're vapid, they're actually useful. They're very they just show engagement, but it really doesn't show your influence over those people, because what we really want to see is people doing action, taking action on those things. So just understand that this engagement rate is one flavor of it, but I would actually really recommend you to look at your influence rate. What is it that you want people to actually do? And of the number of people who see your call to action, that where you say, "Hey, can you jump?" They say, "Sure, yeah, I'm going to jump," and actually go forward and do that. And so we want to make sure that people take action on the things we're asking them to do. And those calls to action, the number of people who call, you see those calls to action, how many of those people actually do it? And that actually ends up being a more useful rate of return on your efforts. But either way, what they show here is your average feed post engagement rates. Of course, nano influencers have a much higher, 75% more than your macro and mega macro influencers, double that of micro influencers. And again, if we go back to our chart here, the nano influencers are that 1 to 10,000 influencers, right? And so when we go back down to this report here, what we're seeing is that the next tier, which is our micro influencers, 10,001 to 100,000 followers, they have 50% of the post engagement rate than the nanos. And then when we get up to here to the mid macro and mega macro, they have much less. But the sponsored posts end up being 1.4% for mega macro, which is not terribly bad for the dollars you would spend to get a sponsored post out there to those people. Remember that we're talking about 1.4% on 1 million followers is far more people than 4% on 10,000 followers, right? We're talking about 4%, would be something like 400, right? And 1.4 out of 1 million, we're talking about, what is that, 14,000, something like that. So, a lot more people are seeing those posts from or is it 140? Somebody can tell me if I've got my math wrong there. But either way, 1.4% of 1 million is a heck of a lot more people than 4% of 10,000 at the upper end of the nano influencers. So we need to be mindful of the fact that notwithstanding the amount of post engagement rate here, the amount of people who are seeing that content is still substantially more in the larger groups of influencers or the larger influencer sizes. So they wrote here as a key learning, nano influence, quoting it, it says, nano influencers have the highest engagement rate of any influencer tier, but their audience size is the smallest. If you're looking to target small, highly engaged communities, working with multiple nano influencers could be a great strategy for your brand marketing approach. This could be a time-consuming process, but influencer marketing solutions offer a way to scale your efforts through technology. And I would agree with them. I think that in this particular case, most small businesses are going to actually be more effective by reaching out to nano influencers and working with multiple nano influencers who have small, highly engaged communities. It's just a reality factor. It's going to be a little bit more work than, say, a Coca-Cola going out there and working with a mega macro influencer who can really go out there and reach millions of people at one time. But in reality, your business shouldn't and doesn't need millions of people seeing your content. What they really need are dozens of people seeing your content in order to be able to be effective for your business. And then if you're in a big, higher tier small business and you need, say, hundreds or thousands of people to see your content, that's all right. You're working now with the micro, mid, and macro tiers and going from there. The next thing they look at is basically feed post reach rates on Instagram and how the follower counts impact those rates. And so again, what we see here is the same kind of tiered perspective here. We see that at the highest end, we see that the feed actually, the posts that are landing in the feed reach nano influencers audiences at a higher rate, 33.8% in terms of all posts. not much less across the entire board, 33.8% to 30.7%, all the way down to 8.3 to 8.1% at the mega macro level. They do reduce, right? Like 8% versus 33% is a big difference. But it seems like sponsored and all posts tend to stick across the board for everybody. So that's not terribly bad. Again, their key finding here, quoting again, nano influencers have the highest average feed post reach rate of all influencer tiers, but their overall following is significantly lower. You'd have to work with dozens of nano influencers to reach the same volume of people as micro, mid, macro, or mega macro influencers would reach in a single post, end quote, which again makes total sense. And quite honestly, if you are trying to get in front of a very specific audience in a very specific community, then you can do that with a nano influencer. If you're really trying to reach a larger audience, then you start to look at the larger influencer audiences in order to do that. They then did this again with post saves. Basically, on Instagram, you can save a post. They did this as well. You can see that the nano influencer had a remarkably higher feed post save rate than the others. So really the same message applies. They did this with video view rates. Again, we had a little bit more parity between nano and micro influencers. And then again, that tiered lowered approach up to mid macro and mega macro. And their key finding here was, again, nano influencers, the highest feed post video view rate, but their smaller audience size limited the true value of this metric. Working with micro, mid, or macro influencers is often more viable when it comes to video. So that was really interesting for me because video ended up being a little bit more nuanced in how the micro, mid, and macro influencers really affected the impact of efficacy for those rates. And so the report then ended with basically which influencer tier is best for brand marketing. And they ended up really describing what we've been talking about across the board. It said, at first glance, of course, nano influencers look like they are more viable for influencer marketing partnerships, highest engagement, highest reach, highest video viewership rates, and consistent performance across sponsored and all posts. But they warn you that, of course, with smaller audiences, means that you're getting in front of fewer people every time you pay for those nano influencers to do a sponsored post or to do some kind of collaboration with them. That being the case, they're also the least expensive, but you're going to have to do more of them in order to be able to do it. On the macro to the mega macro side, you're going to pay more in order to be able to put out those posts, but you're going to get far greater reach and a more generalized audience, right? Because not every person in a million or 2 million people who are seeing a post are going to be all the same types of people. People who follow macro or mega macro influencers are going to be a more generalized audience, and they may follow many, many more people who may not be interested in exactly what that macro or mega macro influencer is going to be interested in. So you have to take the good with the bad here. Again, what I get from this audience is that if you are a local small business, you are going to be really looking to make sure that you are working with those micro and nano influencers effectively to be able to get in front of the right audiences. Most likely, the nano and micro influencers are really going to be the people who have a local, very specific audience, or if they're not necessarily a local audience, a very specific audience that you're trying to go after. And you really want to pay attention to going after those targeted audiences. It's going to be a little bit more difficult, but thankfully it's going to be cheaper for you to be able to get in the door with those influencers and be able to work with multiples of them as you're making your way through. And I just thought the report was elucidating in a lot of different ways, and I hope that it's useful to you. I hope that you check it out and read through it and figure out where you might want to work with that. And also, if you yourself are producing content as a creator, where you may be able to utilize this material for purposes of understanding how your influence rates are affected by virtue of your size. And this is really important for us all to understand as small businesses as well. So with that, we've come to the end of our time together this week. Thank you all so much for joining me for this time. If you've enjoyed the live stream, feel free to click the thumbs up icon. That helps us make new small business friends. And so thank you for doing that. If you have a question, feel free to leave a comment. You can also tweet or message me at W3. W3 is the number 3, W3 Consulting on Twitter or any of the other socials. Join us here while we came to you a little bit later in the week. This week, we usually go live on Monday, typically at 11 a.m. Eastern. So just join us on Mondays. You'll see notices on social media and otherwise about that. And again, thank you so much for spending this Web and Beyond live with me. I'm Ray Sidney Smith on behalf of W3 Consulting and our subsidiary W3C Web Services. Have a great week ahead, marketing your small business on the Web and Beyond.